Okay, so our next topic is about faith and science. So this is a very popular question. It's more of a modern thing where people have pitted science against faith, but I think one of the most popular questions is about evolutionary theory. So this leads us to our first question is, let's assume the case that scientists have somehow proven, without a doubt that evolution is in fact true. That's how things evolved. People have come to, have evolved from another great ape. So in modern science, usually the things that they point to as evidence for evolution is one, that, for example, our chromosomes and the chromosomes of the other great apes. So we have, I believe it's 46, and the other great apes have 48. And so they've been able to match that. And so for the missing pair, they'd say it's like ours fused. Another thing is genetic similarities between us and even, for example, a rat. That's or even yeast, for instance. Yeast has anywhere between 10 to 20% sharing the genome of a human, right? And so the real question we want to ask, since evolution is so central to scientific modern understanding of ecology, biology, genetics, even neuroscience, right? Neuroscience is a very special field when you're looking at the human brain. Does it contradict Christianity in some way? Even if it were true, does it contradict the Genesis story or Christianity? Okay. All right, panelists?
No, it doesn't. But maybe a better question is evolution consistent with Christianity? My answer to the question is no. I was at UC Riverside. A Russian student asked me a question. I was doing an apologetics seminar. It was largely non-Christians. And he kind of asked me the evolution question. He's like, monkeys, gorillas, chimpanzees are very similar to human beings. Doesn't that prove evolution? And I said, are you surprised that Acura cars are very similar to Honda Accords and Honda Civics? Are you surprised that they're similar? He's like, what do you mean? I said, they're very similar. And the reason they're similar is because they are made by the same company. So maybe the gorillas and chimpanzees were made by the same company, God. Stephen Gould used to be a evolutionary biologist at Harvard University. He's an atheist, he's not anymore. He became a theist shortly after he died. That's a joke. That was a joke. He now knows that God is real. But anyway, Gould, he's a full professor at Harvard, so, he's not dumb, he's pretty smart, but he rejects Darwinian evolution, which is interesting to me. And the reason is because the fossil record doesn't support it. But he's an atheist. He assumes that evolution is true, but from rationale and common sense, he rejects Darwinian evolution because the fossil record does not support a gradual evolutionary process. So I use him as an example to kind of strike against Darwinian evolution because he's in a sense a hostile witness to a creation or intelligent design type of position.
I think a lot of times we feel like we have to be one or the other. That either I'm very scientific and I can't be religious, or I have to be religious and I can't be scientific. We don't think we can actually reconcile the two together, right? And I think math and is the language that God uses to create the universe, and I believe that we can reconcile those things together. There is a way to have a conversation, at least a conversation. You guys get me? It's not like you're going to get in there and you're going to try to prove and disprove. Everyone's going to have their reasonings one way or the other. You guys get me? The battle is not in fighting for dominance in your area. The battle is, can I have a conversation with you where we are able to connect in such a way where we are directing the conversation to ask the question, is what you believe in livable? then is there any actually proof to it? Does your belief actually have human experience? Can human experience back up your belief, right? And I like this quote from Robert Jastrow from God and the Astronomers. This is what he says. He says, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries, right? I think science gives a good answer to how things work, right? I think religion gives the essence of the heart of it. Now, if someone had to ask me this question, and I've wrestled with this question as a bio major for a long time, and this is what I would say. I wouldn't say, I wouldn't directly say macroevolution is a plausible theory. Macroevolution meaning you start from an amoeba and then you get yourself all the way up to the human race, right? Macro changes big changes over time, right? I would give a more leeway to what we call microevolution, which is small changes over time. Like for example, if you are a human being and you live high in the mountain ranges, what you would see over time is that the evolution of your lung capacity gets bigger, right? Or if you are a human being and you you live closer to shepherds or farms and animals, what you see is a higher immunity towards certain things. You see it as evolution in your system, but you're still what? A human being, right? In the same way, what we see Darwin saw in the Galapagos Island were these finches, right? They're all finches still, but they just evolved to match their location, right? Some finches had long beaks to match their ability to eat. Some finches grew smaller beaks to eat the nuts and the hardest stuff. And so they evolved to be able to match the environment, but overall they're still finches, okay? So what I would say in terms of this question is, I would say that yes, I think evolution, there's plausibility for evolution, but what God does is that he directs the steps of evolution. He directs it to, for once there's a creation, after creation starts, God takes control and he uses the avenue, the tool of evolution to direct the creation process to where we are today. Right? I would give that answer as a way of starting the conversation with someone who is scientifically inclined.
I think what if evolution is true is not that big of a deal for us. Actually, for me, maybe. Because I think Genesis chapter 1 talk about the fact of the matter is there is a creator God. Evolution, if you want to interpret it, you can interpret it in many different ways. One of the ways that evolution is more about how God created the world, perhaps. So there's a way that you can do that. But I think even among the Christian circle, there are people who believe in the, old Earth creationists, young Earth creationists, macroevolution, microevolution. So what really, really helped me is a piece of writing that Saint Augustine wrote 1,000 years ago. And in his article, in his writing, he talked about the pervasive view of the world at that time. Before chemistry, before science, they really know everything. At that time, Aristotle's way of looking at the world is everything in the world get created by earth, water, fire, and air, right? And they have different way that they can say, how can we prove this stuff? And Augustine, basically, what he said is science, or the study of mankind, is basically we trying to searching for truth. We want to know the truth. And the world, actually, God is the creator. So if God creates, God is the one who actually revealing the truth. So ultimately, by the time that science finishes its question, is way of searching for the truth, eventually it will meet God, because God is the one who revealed the truth. Just like the quote Pastor Tony talked about. They searching all this stuff. They climb up the mountain. They see a theologian already there, because ultimately the truth of God is going to be I think our understanding about the world around us through science approximately. So eventually we'll get know more and more and more about the truth God created for us. So that is how I choose, basically. That's why I don't really hold this question is a big deal or big deal breaker, because for me that just is really irrelevant. The important thing is there a creator, and is that creator knowable? Is that creator care for us? Is Jesus the Son of God? I think that matter more than these things.
Right.
A good book that's very readable, Defeating Darwinism by Opening Minds, written by Philip Johnson, who is the Berkeley law professor. Well, in the past, he was a professor at Berkeley. Also wrote the book Darwin on Trial. That's the college version, Darwin on Trial. The high school version of that book is Defeating Darwinism by Opening Minds. My entire apologetics course is online, in case you're interested. I have about 5 hours dedicated to this particular topic in my course, and you can get it for free, open.biola.edu, and my entire 15-week course is online. If you want to listen to any of the lectures, there's 1 or 2 dealing with this issue of Darwinism.
Well, that's a very... So essentially, what they're saying here is that evolution as a concept, as a theory itself, in no way does it affect the truth of Christianity, okay? It's saying that, one thing when I was teaching this topic to some of the kids in MASA is that even if evolution were true, Jesus didn't come as a monkey, he came as a man, right? So it doesn't really matter in that sense if evolution are true or not. It really matters about who Jesus is. That's what Christians are. Christians are not about whether or not evolution is true. Christians are about is Jesus who he said he was, right? So
I think that Darwinian evolution, any type of evolution, because it's really based on atheism, is the foundation of evolution. So I think evolution is incompatible as far as Christianity. It's incompatible. You're not being consistent. So there's some Christians that say that they're theistic evolutionists. You know, I want to be kind to them, but I strongly disagree with them. It's inconsistent as a worldview. J.P. Moreland has written on this subject. One of his areas actually is the nature of science. He's actually written a book on it and written quite a few articles on it, and he has the same position. Evolution is inconsistent with a Christian worldview, but you'll find Christians that want to grab both ideas, but they're not consistent, in my opinion.
okay, thank you. All right, so let's move to the next question. So this is kind of a summary of a lot of questions. If you come from a very scientific perspective, right? If we're just a collection of atoms, that means that all of our thoughts, emotions, relationships, are they just some neural sparks, right? We're just some complex arrangement of atoms. In that sense, why does it matter that we have ideas like religion? Doesn't it, the fact that everything's made out of atoms, just quickly reduce all such considerations down to irrelevance? And so I think in the modern age, this question has come to a peak in terms of neuroscience. So neuroscience, in the last 50 years or so, we've discovered several chemicals in the brain. There's more than these 3, which is important, but in particular, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. So these 3 chemicals regulate a lot of your brain activity. And so a lot of people believe is that these chemicals are your brain activity. And so we'll see what our panelists think about that.
Oh, you are the chemistry expert.
I did study chemical engineering, so yeah.
Is there something about us that is non-physical? And the answer is yes. Thoughts are not physical substances. And the argument against me would be that, John, all that thoughts are C-fiber firings in the brain or electrical chemical processes in the brain. That's actually false. This gets really complicated. I'm not sure if I can make it simple. I'll do the simple route, and if you want a more complicated route, then I'm going to have to kind of drown you with a little bit of philosophy. But it's well worth the time. It's in my course online if you want to do the if you want to catch it. But if I put you on the scale in the morning and I weigh you, and you're kind of comatose, you haven't had your latte or your Starbucks yet, and so you're not thinking a whole lot. And then I throw a question out to you that really is you're passionate about. And so your brain goes from, 2 or 3 thoughts to 3,000 thoughts. When that happens, does the scale go up in weight? Do you increase by 5 pounds when you have lots more thoughts? No. If I send you my course packet for Apologetics, 200 pages, if I send it to you electronically, does your computer weigh more when the information hits your hard drive? No, it doesn't. So there's things like information. Thoughts contain information. Material substance does not contain information. So, a little technical, stay with me. DNA is not information. DNA contains information. Paper and ink, He's got paper and he's got some sentences written on the paper. Is the paper information? No. Is the ink information? No. But you can use material substance, paper and ink, to exemplify information. But before he wrote those sentences down, those sentences existed in his mind. So information is not a material substance. So when you have a thought, that thought is information. So your mind contains thoughts, but those thoughts are not physical substances. When you have a thought in your brain, does it trigger C fiber firings? Yes. Does it produce electrical chemical processes? Yes. But are they the same thing? No, they're not. Absolutely not. I probably won't be able to do this, but there's three issues, different issues. Identity, causation, and connection, those 3. Just because you have causation doesn't mean you have sameness of identity. So if I pick Tony, right? If I pick Tony with a pin, every time I pick him with a pin, he feels pain. There's a causative relationship between being picked with the pin and the experience of pain. But is being picked with a pin identical to the sensation of pain? No. Constant connection, triangle. 3-sidedness is always connected with 3-angledness. But is an angle the same thing as a side? Of course not. No, it's not. But they're always connected. So simply because there's connection or causation doesn't mean there's identity. So whenever I have a thought in my mind, I have electrical chemical processes. The thought actually causes the electrical chemical processes. Or there's constant connection. Whenever I have a thought, there's a chemical process. Simply because there's causation or connection does not necessarily entail identity. It doesn't. And so you have to show identity, but I'm sorry, for the biologists, there's pretty much zero of them have any philosophy. So if you tell them those things, this is all new information to them. They don't know about constant connection, constant causation, or the law of identity. They have no idea of this. So if you want more, it's online.
So I think all this stuff I over my head.
That's for my students most of the time, too.
So I'm going to paraphrase what I heard from, actually I'm going to read from Tim Keller. And he had this line that I found connected with me. It helped me a lot. So he said this: the physiologist would tell you that you are a bag of chemicals. But if somebody tells you that you are only a bag of chemicals, you will punch them in the nose. Why? Because you know that you are more than just chemicals. You know that. Frankly, if you are not more than just chemicals, then you have the right to treat a human being the way you would treat a real bag of chemicals. The fact that we don't treat human beings the way we treat other bags of chemicals shows implicitly that we believe there is material and immaterial part. There are more to us than meet the eyes or the microscope. Right, so I think for me that a little bit more, I understand that because I'm not a chemistry expert, right? But the thing that I would talk to people, okay, so if you believe that you're just a collection of atoms, do you live that way? Do you treat people just like a bunch of, collection of atoms? Do you treat like love the same way? Yeah, it's just like my brain just firing off stuff, none of that stuff really matters. We don't live like that. So why would you want to basically, believe in this and live according to that way?
Yeah, I want to add on to what Pastor Bumble said. This system of thought comes from a belief system where everything is by nature. natural, right? You are a collection of atoms, collection of synapses, collection of all these things influencing your behavior. Now the issue here, when you have a belief system, is you have to ask the question, is your belief system, like Pastor Bumble said, livable? Can you actually live it with the human experience? So imagine you're about to get married, and I'm about to give you away, and I said, do you have any vows to give to your wife? And this dude comes up and he says, I love you. But my love for you is not real. It's just a bunch of synapses telling me that the feelings I have for you is love. And therefore you have no purpose nor significance in my life. I just feel this way because of the naturalness of the chemicals that are firing. Now, as a human being, you would take that as, though I'm done with you, right? Like, marriage over. See, we would never say that. So the only way that you can justify the sense of love is that you have to not think about this. You guys get me? If you come from this belief system, the only way that you can make sense of the love or the beauty that you see or experience is that you have to forget about your actual belief system. So any belief system where you are walking along this way, but you have to actually let it go in order to engage in a different area of life, it gives you an impression that that belief system has some sort of fault to it. Does that make sense? So what we're trying to say here is this. Like, look at this belief system. Does this belief system have a way of dealing with the experiences of life? If it has to borrow from somewhere else to give justification to why you feel or think a certain way, then there's something faulty about the belief system. And therefore, we have to really re-examine that. Does that make sense? That's all it is. And so when we have a conversation with people, especially when they bring this stuff up, they say, okay, well, you know what, you're right, but can you live it? Right? It makes sense, but can you actually live it out? Is this actually consistent with the human experience? And what you'll find them saying is that, well, either I have to pretend like it doesn't exist, it's not real, or I have to forget about it in order to make my life livable. Then if that's the case, then there's something wrong with your belief system.
A book, if you're interested in this area, Body and Soul by J.P. Moreland and Scott Ray, two biology professors. Body and Soul deals pretty extensively with this issue.
So more generally, this view in science is a philosophical view. It's not necessarily scientific. It's known as scientific reductionism. And actually, there's a lot of scientists who would agree with this. So if anyone knows, Richard Dawkins is technically a scientist who would believe in this. He has a book called A Selfish Gene. It's essentially reductionism on the level of genes. The thing is, in a sense, it's inconsistent because you can go levels beyond that. And there's a lot of scientists who criticize him. They themselves, not necessarily being Christians, they criticize him for his philosophical reductionism. And so, yeah, right, let's get on to the next question. Okay, so this is a more modern question, much more interesting, I think. It's that I think you guys have probably been exposed to a lot of AI, right? Every time you type into Google, you're using an artificial intelligence algorithm now. It's no longer just, if there's anyone interested in math out there, it's no longer just some PageRank algorithm based on Markov chains. Now they're actually using some artificial intelligence. Recently, I saw this video actually where they took some of Bach's compositions and they randomly deleted some notes. And then they made an artificial intelligence algorithm try to fill those in. So now that this artificial intelligence can write melodies or some melodies to notes you put in. But the thing is, on a more complex level, in recent times, they designed a computer that could beat the world's best chess player at the time. The computer was known as Deep Blue, and the chess player was... his name is not Magnus Carlsen, Russian guy, Kasparov, Garry Kasparov, that's him. So Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov under kind of questionable circumstances. Okay, Deep Blue was not an AI algorithm. Okay, so they made an AI algorithm that can consistently defeat Deep Blue. Okay, so that's how many levels we're above human ability now. The real question is, though, if we can make such complexity in our machines, doesn't that take away from the idea of the human being divine? And in the extreme case, and one of you actually asked this question, and I was actually kind of surprised, is that what if humans could actually make something sentient from, AI?
They can't. Consciousness comes from a soul. A computer or AI is a computer program, it's software, doesn't have a soul. Could it approximate it? Probably, AI is, going crazy, and it might scare us in the future. Who is it recently said, Zuckerberg or somebody said, don't go down this road. And he's like, this is dangerous, don't go down this road. Very interesting, coming from somebody who probably doesn't have a Christian worldview, but he's warning against AI. So can they do it? No, because it doesn't have consciousness, doesn't have a soul.
I think, and I'm a computer science guy, so I think the first thing that you have to define is what do we mean by a conscientious computer. And even if AI advanced, I'm not so sure what does it have to do with, human special or not special.
So let me so this is kind of related to the previous question. Mm-hmm. So the assumption is that scientists, if you go from a purely scientific perspective, if we're just made of matter and atoms, right? And in principle, it would be possible to replicate the same kind of logical processes on a computer. And I think to add on to that, human idea of consciousness, I think we've kind of been deceived in the past because there are animals that can recognize their own reflections. That's not something. Leopards, dolphins, elephants, all of these animals are able. When you put a mirror, they actually try to steal time away from each other to stare at their own reflections. So we know from a lot of experiments that animals are aware of themselves in some sense. And so that's why the idea of humans potentially creating a sentient computer is prevalent.
See, I can chime in and say the advance in AI is alarming because I think beyond the algorithm that beat Deep Blue, I think latest advances when they actually do deep learning and stuff. The scary thing is even the people who put together these algorithms, they don't even know how it works.
That's true, yeah.
That's why I think Elon Musk and all these guys, Stephen Hawking, basically being to say, hey, wait a minute, this is way beyond what we know how to contain. But I'm not so sure if that make human less special or not less special, because when we create the nuclear bomb, for example, does it make us less special? Because that now it can destroy way, way more than human being can wage war. So I think creating these kind of even AI and stuff, I just don't see the connection between that and the specialness of human, because now you also have to talk about, do they, for example, let's take some of these stuff beyond just calculation and pattern recognition that AI seems to do really, really well. But when we talk about intuition, when we talk about love, when we talk about the other stuff, human being is actually way more complex than that, right?
Yeah.
So that's just one aspect of it. So that's why I don't see the connection. I don't see the invention of AI as anything that can supersede human.
Yeah, I think in the same way, this humanity, what makes humanity so unique is our ability to understand justice, understand morality, love, beauty, to be able to take those things and sense from it, And for a artificial intelligence, I think the best you can get is to the point of a logical probability structure, what is the best, but you cannot get into the area of, an AI and artificial intelligence can't touch the area of justice. It can't touch the area of mercy. It can't touch the area of empathy. Areas where it's very unique to be human versus anything else. So as much as we can develop those systems that connect things together, what makes us human is a whole different level of consciousness, which I think what John was saying is the soul.
Right.
What makes us human is we're created in the image of God. That's what makes us human beings. That's also what gives us value. It's not our ability to write a good paper or to write a book or to fix a car, or what makes us valuable is we're created in the image of God. What happens when you have a child that's got severe deformities, can't communicate, has just a brain stem, alive, but has no cognitive abilities? Are they valuable? Yeah, they are. They're equally valuable as you or I. Why? Because they're created in the image of God. Side note, mammals have souls. So the elephant seeing its reflection, it's because it's got a soul. Dogs have souls. Cats have souls. Genesis chapter 1, verse 18 through 20 talks about mammals having souls. And then there's evidence, empirical evidence. Anything that's got relational capacity shows evidence of a soul. So dogs have relational capacity. So it actually fits into my paradigm.
Oh, okay.
So he's got a question. I don't know if you want to have him.
So we do have a burning question. All right.
But before you answered all three questions with the supposition that humans value intelligence. I'd sort of like you to sort of postulate on how you came to that conclusion in the first place, because I think that's a necessary foundation before you answer any of these questions. First, why we value intelligence so much.
So I think the supposition is actually probably come from the question, right? I mean, the question asking have that presupposition of we value human intelligence because we're intelligent, therefore we are human. But I think the panel, according to what been said, is actually more than just intelligent, right? So I think in a way, John talked about, I mean, he go for the one that really is very difficult to argue about is the soul, right? So he said the human is special because of the soul of our capability to connect to God, for example, right? So, but I think you're right about that presupposition. I mean, it was there in the question, but I don't think that's what the panel actually agree with.
All right, that's good. Right. So 2 minutes for questions, and then we'll move on to the next topic if there are big ones that come up. Does everyone here know the site we're using? Do we? Oh. There was a good one that was asked slightly earlier, kind of the one I was referencing. So the question is, suppose AI were to advance to the point of sentience, would such a being be able to go to heaven or become a Christian? I think we've somewhat answered that.
No, it's
Yeah.
not a human being. It's not a person.
Oh.
Oh, the soap. Oh, yeah, sure. Can I do the ivory or no?
I'm sorry, what story?
Ivory soap.
The one you come off from.
Oh.
Science.
In regard to supernatural.
All right.
Science deals with induction. So 24 bars, and I say that proves it. All it proves is probability. Induction deals with probability. If you have a bacterial disease, a upper respiratory infection, If you give that person amoxicillin, it will cure the bacterial infection 95% of the time. That's probability. If you give it to me, you're going to kill me because I'm highly allergic to amoxicillin. So in my case, it won't kill the bacteria, it'll kill John. So philosophy deals with deduction. All men are mortal. By that I mean they die. Tony is a man. Therefore, Tony will die. That's a deductive argument. If the first statement is true, the second statement is true, and 1 and 2 are logically linked together, the conclusion not only is true, the conclusion has to be true. So when science says it's proven, don't get me on that one because I'll get kind of ugly on it, but the gentlest way I can say it is that statement is actually false. And I get extremely irritated when I hear some professor or student say, well, science proves it. Science doesn't prove nothing. Science only indicates what is probably true. So, induction. So, science is way overrated. I'm trying to think of the guy who wrote the book back in the 40s about science revolution and the uncertainty of science. Kuhn, trying to think of, maybe you know it. Scientist that wrote this book on the uncertainty of science.
Uncertainty of science.
Written back in maybe the 50s, 1950s.
Yeah, I wouldn't have that in my arsenal right now. Okay. Let's have one more question just along this topic of science, because I don't want to leave this one out because this is a very good one. I think it may be somewhat difficult to answer. So the thing is, one person asked, "What are our thoughts on designer babies?" And I think the more general question is, what is the genetic engineering? Are we playing God? To what it maybe
yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, that's a very quick answer.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's with wisdom, but like to engage in areas where we, one, have no full understanding of, and then two, we are in ourselves trying to be the center. The issue is that we are trying to be the center of the universe here. We are trying to be the one that conducts everything. And so the Christian message is always, when you place yourself as the center, danger comes. Danger is the result of it at all times, right? And so the only thing that is works as center is God Himself, and we revolve around that. That gives us a sense of, because that's the way we're made. The only way we flourish as humanity is that we flourish according to the direction and the path that is designed for us. Whereas when we try to take a hold of it, and we can try to do our best to it, and what ends up ultimately happening is just more brokenness and different paths, and it's just a spiral out of control. So it may sound nice to design your own baby and to have your own set of characteristics, but in reality, it can open up doors to things that you and I can't even imagine, but a generation after us can actually create even something even more ridiculous out of it.
There's a Chinese scientist, mainland China, just 3 months ago, that did some major genetic engineering on a human being. Chinese government is, they're massively atheistic, don't have any moral code. Yeah. And they condemned him, stripped him of his position, and he might be going to jail for a long time. That's how an atheistic country, China's government, responded to him, because they think it's at least dangerous. I don't know if they thought it was immoral or wrong, but he's in serious, serious hot water. I'll be in China this Saturday, actually. I'm going to China for a month.
Yeah.
Pray for me.
For a while, the Chinese government didn't actually do anything, and then they had a lot of international pressure to, do something about it. Yeah. It is a really scary story. But I think maybe a more nuanced question. What if we could use genetic engineering to consistently remedy things such as, certain genetic disorders, for example, like Huntington's disease or certain, Down syndrome, where if we could eliminate, for example, the Down syndrome, if we could eliminate the extra chromosome, the person wouldn't have like such disorder anymore. What are your thoughts on using genetic engineering as a form of, therapy in that sense?
It scares me, because the selfishness and the waywardness and the lack of moral compass in our culture scares the crazies out of me with this idea of genetic engineering. Is there some benefits? Yes, but the risks are very large. And is there something wrong with death? I mean, yes, in some respects, it's not a part of the original plan. But, we're all going to die. Unless Jesus comes back during our lifetime, but, that's a, minor exception. So, I would not vote for it. If it was on the ballot, I would probably not vote for it. But it begins to be a very complicated discussion, and where do you set the boundaries, and how do you control people that are doing this engineering? It's a can of worms. It just opens up massive problems.
And I think is also one thing that I would be ready to admit is that I'm not the expert in that field. So I think this is also the more reason why we need more people who in that field who actually be able to process this stuff, because things actually much more complicated. It may have a lot of nuance, right? Like I remember in my ethics class in seminary, and the question come about when you have designed a baby, they're still in test tube, right? And you're supposed to store those things. Are they human? Are they not human? They were like fertilized, egg and sperm. Are they human or are they not human? And now they put it into a refrigerator to store these. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to dispose? After you use some of them to have your kids and the rest of them you dispose? So these become questions really, really complicated that we have to basically hash it out, right? And then people who are bioethicists have to basically have to wrestle with this kind of thing.
And if I can just add, it's what we see is in the first generation of whatever it is that is planned, it always seems to be the best. Things seems to work out. Everyone seems to agree and kind of have this kumbaya kind of moment. But it's the subsequent generation that comes after that forgets the purpose, the cause, or the reasons, and then they go down whatever spiral they have. And we see that within Scripture, where the first generation knew of God, loved God, and then generations after that did not, and they abandoned God. And so in their small compromises, what we see an avalanche that comes later on, And just because right now we don't see the downfall of it, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't. And so the best way oftentimes is to move on the conservative side and say, let's really consider the dynamics of this, and let's pause on this rather than just jump all in and say yes to it, just because for that moment it seems beneficial.
Right.
We're going down that road. That road, we're going to go down it. There's already lots of genetic engineering. And I don't think we're going to be able to stop it, even if it's the wrong direction. We're going there. But I don't agree with it, and there's got to be some limits, but the culture is not going to have very many limits on it. It's going to break loose, unfortunately.
That's true. I think there's a general principle that if you look at a lot of human societies, that culture is a lot of times downstream from economics. So if any of you have seen the movie Gattaca, anyone? And so what you see is that by the time it becomes economically viable to engineer humans to be more successful, more smart, even if there's a cultural stigma, eventually it will disappear because humans are selfish. Yeah. So there's a danger in that. Right. So let's move on to our last topic. Wow, we got through a lot so far. So this is kind of opening it back up. So this is more questions about God. And I think a lot of our panelists, this is the leveling off. This is the jogging and the slowing down after the hard run. I've been pressing you guys pretty hard. I went through so much stuff. Yeah. All right. So let's get into it. Question 1: why does God allow natural evil? So wait. A lot of people say, a lot of Christians have encountered that question: why does God allow evil? And a lot of times we say, okay, the world is imperfect, sure. But I think there's a poignant point in saying, for there to be moral, culpability, moral kind of action. You have to be able to choose to do certain things, and that leaves the possibility of evil. However, there's things that are clearly humans don't control. And a lot of times when these things happen, when these big tsunamis happen, when these big earthquakes happen, when these big hurricanes come in and kill thousands of people, many of whom we know were probably not Christian, why does God allow that?
Edwin Lutzer's got a great book that I've read twice on the topic. It's dealing with natural disasters. So read the book. The question is an extremely difficult question of which we don't have a complete or a simple answer on it.
I think for me, the reason that we have natural disaster and things that go wrong in the world, because of also a result of sin, because I think originally when God created the world, it was perfect. And when Adam and Eve sinned, because God basically put the dominion of the world under Adam and Eve, humankind, when they rebel against God, the universe also being cursed by that. That's why in Romans 8 talking about the universe is longing, groaning for the day of its own redemption. Right, so things like natural disaster, tsunami, all these terrible things, people born blind, or stuff like that, was a result of because of sin basically tainted our world, so it leading to the other area in our world.
This question it's actually posited from a very modern type of thinking. Right? People of the ancient world, when a natural disaster happened, and they have an idea of something beyond them, people in the ancient world. And so when a natural disaster happened, in their mind, God is big enough to control things, right? So they also believe that God is also big enough to do things that we don't have an understanding of why he does it, okay? For the people of the ancient world. In the modern world, what we see is, unless I can see a reason for it, there must not be a good reason for it. You guys get the difference? In the ancient world, they believe that God is big enough. He's big enough to control the world and run the universe. He's also big enough to have reasons for things that we ourselves can't understand. They have a natural understanding of that. Modern thinking is, hey, if I can't see why, there must not be a reason why. Okay? And so when it comes to this question of evil, just because you yourself can't understand why, it does not necessarily mean that there's no good reasons for it. Does that make sense? And one example I can give, the best example I can give of this is, how does this play out? And the best example is from a pastor's point of view, is if you look at the story of the Bible, the whole Bible is pretty much the story of Jesus. You guys follow? From the very beginning, it's the foreshadowing all the way to Jesus. And what we see is one story of Jesus Christ, and we see in the midst of the story, God allowing Christ to suffer, to go through what we call just evil, all right? For what purpose? For a bigger purpose. We see the salvation of the world and humanity and all that stuff. But that's one story. You guys get that? And God opens the door for us to see it through that one story. So that just means that every one of us technically have a story very similar. That when evil or disasters or things that happen to us that are outside our realm of understanding, it does not mean that there is nothing good about it. What it does mean is that there's something that we can't understand about it. You guys follow? Now, that does not answer the question. I get it. That does not answer the question, well, why does God allow it? Listen, I can't give you an answer why he allows it, but I can give you the answer of what I know that it isn't about. Okay? It isn't because he doesn't love us. Okay? Let me try to read that again. He allows it, it's not because, I don't know the reason why he allows these specific circumstances to happen to you. But what I do know is what it isn't. It isn't because he doesn't care. Because what we see in the Christian story, the Christian narrative is this resource of understanding of suffering. If God would allow his son to die on the cross, right, come down to take the sins of man, to die on the cross, suffer an evildoer's death, go to the grave, unknown, hated, scorned by the world. For the sake of what? For the sake that he would be able to draw closer to you. Okay? So if that's the case, the suffering that happens in your life, it isn't because he is far from you. he has excluded himself from you. He no longer wants you. The suffering that happens in your case, and we can only understand this through the cross, that it must not be because he does not care, right? And if we see it through that lens, then all of a sudden we are able to have this resource in our life to stand up when suffering comes. We are able to have this resource that when our family has cancer, people that we love, we can actually deal with cancer, mourn, of course, but understand, have a foundation to deal with this, right? And we see this in history, how the Christian worldview allowed for Christians to give up their own lives for the sake of others because of this idea of suffering is not without cause. Suffering is not because God hates me. Suffering is, there's something deeper to suffering. And so, I mean, that's all I can give you.
Three categories of evil: moral evil, which would be like murder; physical evil, cancer; and then the last type of evil, natural disaster or natural evil. They're different, and there's kind of a little bit different answers. His answer is a phenomenal answer for the moral evil and the physical evil. Natural evil, which we oftentimes think of as evil, actually may not be. Volcanic eruptions are necessary for life on this planet. Earthquakes are necessary for life on this planet. Tornadoes, hurricanes are necessary for life on this planet. I don't have time to explain why. Again, I'm going to refer to you a book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Hugh Ross, in some of his other books, explain details of the necessity of these events happening in order to sustain life on planet Earth. All of these are necessary. So, natural evil may not always be evil, but it can result in evil because you happen to have your condominium on top of Mount St. Helens when it blows up, and so you get vaporized. There was a guy actually that stayed on Mount St. Helens, had his cabin up there, and they're like, it's going to blow up. He's like, I don't care. So he got atomized.
Wow, great answers. Right, so next question. So this is a very philosophical one. So usually we attribute the ability to sin to someone's capacity for free will, right, decisions. So I've encountered this question, once or twice, but it says, if God cannot sin, does he have free will? And we know that God can't sin. That's his nature. But in that sense, does that mean that he doesn't have free will?
If you define free will as the ability to make a morally wrong choice, then the answer would be no, he doesn't. But if you define free will as the ability to make choices, so did God have to create the universe? No. So he chose to create it, but he did not have to. That's a depiction of what's called libertarian freedom, the ability to choose A or to choose B. God clearly has libertarian freedom. He didn't have to create the universe. So he does have free will, but he doesn't have the free will, if I kind of use it in a different definition. Does God have the ability to sin? No, he doesn't. He does not have that capacity. I'm not sure that that's true freedom, actually, when you think about it. True freedom is the ability to do what is right. Think about it. True freedom is the ability to do what is right. Any idiot can do what is wrong. Any idiot. And our prisons are jammed with them. So God has the ability only to do what is right, morally speaking. But he has libertarian freedom related to things like creating the universe. And maybe, we could discuss, this could be an interesting topic, the areas where God has libertarian freedom and areas where he does not. Does God have the choice to not judge sin? No, he doesn't have the choice. It's because he's bound by his nature of justice. Did God have to send Christ? Well, I'll leave that for your thought pattern.
Nothing else to add.
Yeah, I think the word free will sometimes we mess it up in the modern translation. We get this free will of I get to choose whatever I want, right? Reality is you don't really get to choose whatever you want. Let me tell you why. Like for example, if I gave you, and I use this example all the time, if I gave you a plate of maggots and a plate of ribeye steak, right? Do you have the free will to choose the maggot? Technically you do, but will you? No, never, unless you have a gun pointed to your head, right? You will always choose the ribeye. You know why? Because your will to choose is directed by your essence and your nature, right? And so if your nature directs you a certain way, then your choices can only be made in that certain way, right? And so when the question is posited, can God choose to sin? The answer is no. Choosing to sin before God is like choosing the bowl of maggots. He can't, right? Like it's technically there, but he can't do it because his essence, his nature, his inclinations is to be driven in this way instead. Does that make sense? I mean, that's the best I can come with that answer. I don't.
There's a very deep discussion of free will, and I think the thing is that, again, to repeat what they said, is free will doesn't operate free of constraints, okay? Like there's certain things that if you want to be able to make a choice, then you have to have a will to make a choice. And did you choose that will or not? You know, there's free will in the sense that you can do anything is actually, if you were to follow it, it's actually illogical. I can't get into it since we don't have enough time. That's a very deep issue, but right. So actually, but we are coming up on our last question. I think this is the most interesting question of the night. You don't get to hear it a lot. Yeah. So next question. All right. So this question is, why are God's morals what they are? And the thinking is that we know that as Christians, often what we see in our culture is that people are becoming increasingly what we call postmodern. You know, I think people use that term rather loosely, but a lot of it comes to that is this idea of moral relativism. What's true for you is true for you. What's true for me is true for me. And we know that a lot of times we criticize that because it means that you can't really speak truth to anyone else. If someone does something wrong, you know, then how can you, with your sense of right and wrong, criticize them? I think Ravi Zacharias, once asked someone if they believed in, strong moral relativism, and he said yes. And then Ravi Zacharias says, "Do you leave your door open at night? No. Do you lock your door? No." But the question comes here, and it's actually quite an old question. It's known as the Euthyphro dilemma. And so be careful about this. So it's asking, when God says, something is good, is it just because he says it's good, or is it there's some standard of good that's outside of God, okay? So in principle, if God said it's because God says it's good, then he could say the opposite, right? And it would still technically be considered good. So the question is, why isn't God's morality subjective?
Subjective. This dilemma is actually what's called a binary trap. Do you want me to kill you with a baseball bat or a knife? Neither one. Well, I'm sorry, you have to choose one of the two. Well, it's a binary trap. Neither are true. Things are good because they're consistent with God's nature. The choices that the statements that he makes about what's right or wrong are not arbitrary and they're not changeable. And there's nothing outside of himself that's some type of objective standard. So why does God say that it's wrong to lie? Because God is a God of truth. His nature is one of being truthful. Can God lie? No. Can he commit suicide? No. So these things flow to the very nature of God. They're not arbitrary at all. In the Old Testament, he had some rules that he stated to teach lessons, object lessons. But the moral code is a reflection and an outflow of God's very nature. So it's not simply because he said it. Well, I'm going to say this standard. No. Outflow of his nature.
Agree. What else not to agree?
Yeah, I was gonna address that one because this is the only answer I know how to answer. But
So
John already
yeah,
answered it,
there's
so-
a very, really, there's nothing wrong with that because really it's just addressing that false dilemma.
Right.
you know.
It's the trap. You understand that, like John says, when you have a conversation with somebody, what they want to do is they want to trap you in a way where it makes your God diminishes his ability and it makes you look at least dumb, so they can have an upper hand over it. You guys get that? And so when you have a conversation with people, the key when you're engaging with them is to let's set the bar at the same level. Let's not try to stay where you're above me or I'm above you. Let's start at the same level and let's engage the conversation together. So when people engages in conversations like this that traps you, what you gotta do is you gotta say, whoa, wait, hold up. Let me put it back on a level where we can actually have a conversation. And this is where the third option comes out, where the goodness is not from an arbitrary goodness. It is from the essence of who God is. His nature brings forth this goodness. That's what his nature is. It brings forth this, and therefore that's what it is.
Yeah. So there's more historical context in this, and it was a really good criticism back then, especially. So this idea is known as divine command theory. A lot of times, I think kings in the past, they would say God says I'm the king, so therefore, I am the king, right? But this is a really good criticism for a lot of the Greco-Roman gods. Because a lot of their behavior, a lot of times, seemed quite arbitrary. They had their conflicts with each other. They had their sense of right and wrong, which was, it was fickle. So at this time, it was a very good criticism because it seemed like they themselves didn't have this objective standard of judging people. And then they seem just as flawed as people, just more powerful in some sense. But for God, right? God, we attribute his properties to something deeply about his nature. It's not just him behaving erratically. And that's the primary difference. So a lot of times in other religions, would be very, very difficult to answer. And so for Christians, this is where we have one of the few answers that actually make sense. Yeah. And so, all right, well, that was all of the questions. So before we leave, though, we're going to have a time, just another 2 minutes, get your questions out there, and then afterwards, we'll be done, right? I think, actually, the top two here are we can just answer them, because they're pretty good. So the first question is, do babies who die go to heaven?
Yes.
No.
This
My
is an
my
open
best
area of
answer is
discussion.
actually, I don't know, but I have a sheet on it that has 3 options. All babies go to heaven, all babies go to hell, some babies go to heaven, and some babies go to hell. And that option deals with 2 different views, predestination or foreknowledge.
My answer, based on the story when David committed adultery with Bathsheba, she gave birth to a little child, and that child was die early as a punishment. And then, in mourning for that child, David said that I will come to him. So we know that David is in heaven. So if David said that baby who died, that he will come to him, therefore that baby is in heaven. But then that, of course, a particular case of David baby, I would use that to extrapolate that perhaps that apply to other babies as well. But of course, there are room for variation, so maybe there are certain things that in your argument can give room for that as well.
My best answer, if I want to give a philosophical answer, my best answer is I don't know, because I don't think the scriptures really speak to the issue, although this is the classic passage. If you want to believe babies go to heaven, this is the classic passage that you'll have to turn to. But if I want to give a pastoral answer, because a mom just had her 6-month-old baby die, I'm going to say, Jesus loves your baby more than you or I do. We can trust him. I'm going to give her a counseling response. Not, hey, let me tell you the 3 philosophical paradigms on this. She's going to shoot me. You know, she don't want intellectual content. She wants emotional comfort. So I have to assess the type of question that's being asked. Are they asking for an emotional response or an intellectual response? When somebody's hurting, you don't give them philosophy, you give them a hug.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can't imagine coming into a conversation and just saying, especially when someone who struggled with, or maybe had walked into the house and say, you know, I aborted my child. You know, who am I? Where am I? What's going on? It's hard to jump into that conversation and say, well, you're screwed and your kid's screwed. You know, like it's you gotta have a counseling approach to it and a redemption approach to it and a process of really journeying them through this understanding of Scripture and the heart of it and where God is directing that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's a difficult question.
It's a very tough question. Next question. You know, I wasn't originally going to go to this one, but since so many people asked about it, I will address it. Primarily because this isn't really a question about apologetics, but since we're here, we'll just go for it. So the question is, how should a Christian respond towards homosexuality? I think that, honestly, the Bible is quite clear on where we stand, but I do think maybe more of delineation between how a government should handle it and how a church should handle it. So recently, you know, gay marriage has been legalized in all the states. However, there's been some recent developments in different churches. For example, the Methodist Church recently had a resolution to keep their traditional views of marriage, and they got a lot of flack for that. So, Melis, actually.
You're kind of ending with the easiest question here tonight.
Yeah.
No, not really.
Yeah,
not
I
easy.
mean, but the thing is, it's a very popular audience question, so, you know, just, yeah, straighten it out.
My soundbite, I gave a sermon at a Filipino church close by, and my title was on homosexuality, and my title was Compassion and Confidence. We need to have compassion towards people, but we also should have confidence that anything outside of a marriage relationship is inappropriate and wrong. So, you know, I've had, you know, students come to me, Biola, say, John, I have a homosexual orientation, and I want to respond to them with tremendous levels of compassion and listening. But I'm not going to change my paradigm as far as what I am convinced the Bible says about desires. I'm a married man. Should I desire to have sex with every woman that walks by? No, of course not. So I have to control my desires, and I have to focus them on one person, my wife. Even if I have a desire in my heart to have sex with another woman, that desire is wrong. And I need to choose to move away from that desire and align myself with God. Somebody who has homosexual desires, they're inclined towards a certain direction. Like I said to my student at Biola, I said, every day I have to struggle to keep my eyes and my mind on the right thing. Every day you have to struggle to keep your mind and your eyes on the right thing. You and I both have a daily sexual struggle, and our goal is to be faithful to God. Are you going to be faithful to God? And am I going to be faithful to God? Say yes to the Spirit of God, no to my sinful desires. We're both faced with the same desire, the same challenge. And unfortunately, we're both going to have that challenge till the day we die. I feel bad for you. I feel bad for myself.
What was that?
Good? All right.
I would say that, you know, in the same line, we have to remember that in the same line, when Paul writes to the church, usually we single out homosexual people, but in that same list of sin, he also singled out people who are greedy. And I think in a many way, we kind of treat people who have homosexual kind of desire way more than people who are greedy, right? And somehow greed become like acceptable in the Christian circle, but not homosexual. So I think in a way, I mean, he's totally right. We have to be repenting for our own sexual desire, our own sexual sin, our lust, and be compassionate toward people as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for a Christian's way of engaging this topic with maybe a friend or even another person that you know may be struggling with it, right? It's a couple ways. One, you have to the thing that people come at it with, what people think Christian comes at it with is they think that Christians have this sense of I'm better than you because you think that you are straight and therefore you follow your Bible, you follow your God, and therefore you're better than me as homosexual, right? They naturally have that mindset, and you know what? It's not their fault. We actually allow for that. There's people in the news they create that kind of stigma for it. Okay. Well, we need to engage. How we engage with someone who is dealing with this is one. We have to remember to go back with the resource of Christianity. In Christianity, we have the story of the Good Samaritan, right? Where the question was, who is my neighbor? And the ultimate conclusion is, the neighbor is basically your enemy. Those who don't agree, different, ethnically, culturally, sexually than you are. They are your neighbors. And so there is a truth within the Christian resource that demands of you to reach out and to actually be a neighbor towards this person. You guys get that? So first is the compassion of being a neighbor to them. A neighbor in such a way where you are going the distance, loving, caring, providing this need for them. Secondly, when we start talking about homosexuality, you can't just say no or yes. It's bad, it's good for you, okay? You gotta start back, even especially today, from the very beginning of sexual. Why was sexuality created in the first place? What was the point of it? And you develop this picture of how beautiful sex was meant to be, and you give them a redeemed picture of sexuality, so that they can see at least the comparison of the brokenness and the reality of it. If God is true, He is real. This is why He made it. And the reason why He made it is to renew the marriage covenant. Every time you and your wife, when you guys are married, when you say your vows, you're like, yeah, I love you, and then after a couple of years, those feelings pass away and they kind of fade a little bit. Sex, in of itself, has this beauty of renewing.
Preach it, brother.
Right?
Preach it.
Have the beauty of renewing the emotional essence to your relationship, right? So every time sex is involved, you are once again renewing this promise you have to this person, and it's supposed to be this beautiful thing. And what we did was we made it less than the best. Okay, we made it less than the best, and no longer are we allowing it to flourish in our lives. We're using a broken version of it, and so it just takes us on a different trajectory, right? If we are doing something that's less than the best than what was made for us, then instead of flourishing, we're actually diminishing our capacity of being human or what God wants us to be.
Student came to me, believer from USC, met him kind of through crusade. And he said, John, I can't give you the long story, I'm going to give you the short one. He's like, John, I want to pursue the gay lifestyle. Talk me out of it. Gave me 3 months to try to talk him out of it. After those 3 months, he said to me, John, I'm sorry, but I've decided to pursue the gay lifestyle. And I said to him, Schaefer, he gave me permission to use his name. I said, Schaefer, do you know that I love you? He's like, I know. I said, Schaefer, I will not stop loving you. No matter what, I will love you. But you're making the biggest mistake of your entire life right now. But I will continue to love you. Affirmation, love, disagreement. Jesus was full of grace and truth, both. I want to balance those, but I want to balance them in that order. Grace and truth. He knows that I love him a lot. And because of that, I could be direct, not insensitive, but direct with him. And we met more times in the future. One day, I was, trying to get in to influence him, and I said, Schaefer, you think your identity is your sexuality. I said, but that's impossible. This is a problem in the gay community. They think their identity is their sexuality. It's actually false. My identity is I'm creating the image of God. And I said to him, Schaefer, when we get to heaven, there is no sex in heaven. So your identity cannot be sexual. Because for eternity in heaven, there's not going to be any sex or sexual activity. And that was the only thing in my 6 months of conversation with him that actually caused him to pause and think, because he's so over-identified with his sexuality. Sex is great, but it's not that great. Heaven is a lot better. Heaven is a lot better.
So we're I really want to end this soon, and so I'm going to leave it up for our panelists to ask one more question. Except this time, I'll let you decide from the questions on here, if you want to. Yeah.
All right, I'll try to answer the Trinity question real fast for you guys. It's not the. I'll give you the most basic version I can understand of this version. Okay, if you're the one who asked for the Trinity, let me try to. Sometimes what happens when we try to as Christians to talk about Trinity, we start straight up to the illustrations, right? We start talking about like the egg or the water and all that stuff as a way of trying to understand the Trinity. Usually, in order to use an illustration, you have to understand the definition first. So let me give you a definition of the Trinity. Okay, the Trinity. God is one being, three persons. Okay, He is one being, three persons. Now that's not a contradiction. A contradiction would be one being and three beings. Right? That's a contradiction. The contradiction would be one person and three persons. That's a contradiction. Right? One being and three being is not a contradiction. One being and three persons is not a contradiction. So the next question you would ask is, what is the difference between a being and a person? Okay, a being is the essence of what you are. It's the whatness of what you are. Okay, it is the essence of what makes you what makes you the very thing about you. You know, the person is the who you are. You guys get that? It's who you are. So, for example, I am a human being, right? And yet, who am I? Am I just all human? No, I am PT, right? I'm Pastor Tony. I have my ups, I have my downs, I have my things I like, I have things I don't like. Okay? So, for a human being, we are one being and one person. You guys get that? But for God, and don't ask me how it works, okay? This definition is that He is one being and three persons. Now, those three persons exist as Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You guys get that? Now, the question is, how can God be the Son, but also the Father, right? It's very, the best example I can give is this. I am a person, and let's say, for example, John Rittenhouse is the other person. Now, John Rittenhouse is much more, much smarter, much wiser, and much better good looking than I am, right? Maybe. Right? And so when John Rittenhouse walks in, when John walks into a room, he commands the room a little bit more, right, than I do. You guys get me? Right? That's just the role of the being, of the persons. So in the scripture, what we see is the Father, the Son submitting himself to the Father. It's not that they are different, it's just that the roles are different. Their persons are different. The Son is submitting himself to the Father. And we see this in Philippians 2. Though Jesus Christ, in very essence, God did not choose equality with God, something to be grasped, yet took on the form of man, right, and became obedient, even obedient to death. You guys remember that? Okay? And so the picture of the Trinity is that one being, three person, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The Son, in his role, submits to the Father's direction, and the Spirit, does his work in there. So they exist in that form. Don't ask me how or why that happens. It's just that's the definition. That's the best I got.
That's good.
Nicene Creed says one ousia and three hypostasias. Greek. One substance, three persons. It's a great statement. Nicene Creed, 325 AD. Look it up, read it tonight.
I think Pastor John have a whole seminar on the Trinitarian of
Yeah.
God, so I wouldn't want to do that again. So let me pick the easy one from this one.
Sure.
Tattoo. That's the easy one. Yeah, so the tattoos, the question about Levitical, tattoos okay. The answer is if you come to my church, you probably see some guys with tattoos. So, no, I'm too chicken for that. So, for me, the study, actually, a lot of scholars, they do more in-depth study in the passage dealing with tattoo in Leviticus, and their answer for that is actually in the context of the occult practice, the religious practice of the Canaanite. So the Canaanite, they have certain kind of ritual, certain kind of thing. So in that context, what it really means is those tattoos is identifying to the Canaanite religion and stuff like that. So that's why I think for me, I see it's more of a cultural thing, not a moral thing. So that's why I think in our church we say, yeah, I would not advise, like if Timmy wants to get a tattoo, I say think twice about it because it's undoable, right? But it's more of a wise thing, or not wise thing to do, but not like sin or not sin, because it's not a moral thing.
I have a friend was dating his girlfriend, and he tattooed across his chest her name, Janice. When they were dating, and then she broke up with him, and I said, "Bro, what are you gonna do? You're gonna have to date another girl with the name Janice." He's like, "No, I'm gonna marry her. I love her." Well, the story turns out really well because he ended up marrying the Janice that he tattooed. But I'm like, bro, that's huge risk. He's like, "I know, but I'm gonna do it." Question that I'll do is a short answer. If a Christian commits suicide, do they go to heaven? The answer is yes.
Right. So there's a lot of questions, and some of them are branching more out into theological questions. So I think our panelists have done so much for us now. I think I'm just going to end it right now. Please thank our panelists for everything. Yeah. And also, yeah, we have some gifts for you. Thank you for coming. Yeah. Yeah. So I think what I'll do is that some of the unanswered questions, I'll go through them myself and post some resources for you guys, because I think that actually what we've talked about here, just the questions that have been answered, you'll be able to answer most of these unanswered questions if you really think about it. They're not like far away, but really just, again, please thank our panelists. I really grilled them.
Yeah, I want to thank John and Pastor Bumble for coming out, and for all you guys for coming out. It's the goal of this was really to help build your confidence in your faith, and to have the arsenal to know that 2,000 years of Christian history, there hasn't been a question that's been asked that has destroyed the Christian dogma. And so the truth is out there. We hold on a very strong foundation, and we want you guys to have the confidence as you go out and you live out your faith. To not to be swayed by it, is to know that there are real strong, powerful answers that is livable, that takes into consideration the human experience, that can actually change the world around you. So that's my prayer, you guys. I hope you guys will take that, and hope we can do this again maybe next year.
Thank you so much.